Untangled Viners, welcome back to another Future of Work weekly report. I'm Zach Wright, founder and CEO of Grapevine Software. We are the virtual office platform for your remote and hybrid workforce to stay connected and engaged from anywhere in the world. But let's go ahead and dive into this weekly report because I have limited time this week and we have a lot to get through. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first article. If you follow anybody talking about the future of work, remote work, RTO, return to office policies, or flexible work, you know what this article is going to be about. So this is coming from Business Insider. It's an article from March 16th, 2024, and it is about Dell. Okay, Dell workers can stay remote, but they're not going to get promoted. That's going to be, I think, very harmful for Dell's culture, as we see in this article and we'll talk about. And it's just not a good look, especially for somebody who is kind of pioneering remote work or at least the future of work. Let's go ahead and dive into the first bullet point. Dell's shift in remote work policy. Dell, known for its long-standing hybrid work culture, recently implemented a strict RTO or return to office mandate impacting remote workers' career advancement. Now, before this announcement, maybe in 2021 or 22, Dell has said that they were aiming for about a 60% remote workforce. But recent policy shifts challenge this goal. And we'll talk about some of the outcomes or maybe consequences of this towards the end. But there's a quote here from a Dell representative. It says, "For remote team members, it is important to understand the trade-offs. Career advancement, including applying to new roles in the company, will require a team member to reclassify as hybrid on-site." Now, what that says, or what that means in this article, they explain that if you live within an hour of a Dell office, and there's 36 locations, I think the majority are in the United States, but then they have the rest spreading out across the, or internationally. So if you live about an hour away from a headquarters, you'll have to come into the office 3 days a week. Now, the good thing is that they don't make this a structured, flexible work scheme. Instead, they're making it a flexible hybrid scheme, meaning that like those 3 days that you come into the office, you can pick and choose. But a lot of these people were hired during the pandemic as remote workers. And as we see at the beginning of this bullet point, right? Known for its long-standing hybrid work culture. And what they mean by that, to get more granular, is about 10 to 15% of their workforce were 100% remote. And in a lot of these cases, they're not close to the office, right? And so in order for somebody to receive a promotion in their own terms or their own words, they would have to move to a state that, because part of the article I haven't mentioned yet is it has to be the acceptable or approved office. So it's got to be one of those 36. And so if they want to go there or get promoted, they would either have to drive a really long way, which is most likely going to interrupt productivity, which is the exact reason why they're asking people back into the office, which doesn't make sense because there's no research or studies that suggest that being in the office makes you more productive. I digress. They would have to drive into the office a really long way, or they would actually have to move to make it feasible for them to come into the office, right? So that is going to be very difficult. And specifically impacted, this is what the article calls out here, is women. And so bullet point number 2 is gender disparities in policy impact. So Dell's new policy disproportionately affects women, raising concerns about its potential negative impact on gender diversity within the company. And so just to add to that, it says remote teams overwhelmingly impacted, with women bearing the brunt of the policy changes. And just to add on to this with a specific quote from the article, it says, they are overwhelmingly women. This new policy on its face appears to be anti-remote, but in practice will be anti-women. My question is, and I feel like if you take a big approach like this, especially for someone like Dell, who has been kind of a pioneer for the future of work before that even became a phrase, because before the pandemic, they had about 10 to 15% of their workforce working 100% remotely. This is a big shift in culture. And I can only hope that somebody looked at the numbers before they did this, which makes it actually worse. Because if they looked at the numbers and they realized that a significant portion of remote workers were women, and they still chose to move forward with this RTO policy, that means that whatever they say in the public doesn't correlate to what their goals were, 60% remote workforce, that's one. And if they ever made a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion being important to them, this choice says the exact opposite. Right? And it's going to be consequential to their culture, to their diversity, and ironically, to their productivity. It doesn't make any sense. One of the key factors for having an engaged workforce is mastery. And mastery, in other words, means, does this employee have the ability to master their job, their work, their skills, their experience? And underlining, do they have a way to grow? If employees don't have a way to grow, they will not stay. They will not be engaged. They will be dissatisfied. And that will trickle down or spread like a virus throughout your entire culture. We're gonna see how this plays out for Dell in the long run. We've seen so many fail whenever it comes to RTO. Now, I will be generous to Dell in this sense. They weren't as structured as they could have been whenever it comes to this RTO policy. Meaning, it's not a set schedule like, okay, Dell employees who work 100% remote, you're going to have to come into the office Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They are allowing people to choose the days that they come in, from what it sounds like. But the boundaries that they've set, meaning out of the 36 offices, we have to have a place for you to come into. And if you are within an hour of those places, then you have to come in. Again, it doesn't say the specific days, but you have to come in at least 3 days a week. And what the article talks about is how much this is going to impact their workforce. And specifically women, as we talked about. But another underlining set or group of people that are going to be highly impacted are disabled people, right? There was a quote, and I'm going to get it wrong, but basically disabled people in Dell felt really included. They felt seen, they felt heard, they had a better way of working compared to other companies out there. And this policy is not taking them into consideration, just like it wasn't necessarily taking into consideration diversity, equity, or inclusion for women, right? So this is just a message for anybody running a company or taking care of the culture of the company. When you make decisions in an organization, you have to think about the offset. Meaning, if we do this return to office mandate, what does it look like for this group of people, for this group of people, for this group of people, right? And then the other side is the consequences. What does it look like if we do this RTO mandate? If our goal is to have more engaged employees, if our goal is to be more productive, if our goal is to be, you name it, right? If it's in those types of categories, and you've seen the studies out there from Slack, from Atlassian, from people like Brian Elliott, Nick Bloom, you throw it in there, right? We see that return to office mandates actually loses the top talent. And that's actually one of the last articles that we're going to talk about today. But let me get back on script here for a second, because this ties into kind of what we're talking about. Bullet point number 3 is geographical challenges and team dynamics. Now, this is the other part that if they saw the numbers, this makes it worse, which they should. Anytime that you make a decision, it should be off of a little bit of art, a little bit of science, right? But you got to have the data to make better business decisions. So what this bullet point is calling out is the geographical distribution of Dell's workforce poses challenges to the effectiveness of the new policy, with many teams spread across multiple states and countries. One person was quoted saying, "Every team has people in at least 2 states, some in 3 or 4. I can't think of one team where everyone is in one location." Let's talk about this for a brief second. You're talking about a company that has 36 different office locations. They have multiple people living in multiple locations, and not every single person has an office within an hour of them. Meaning, one, which I think is the biggest call out here, is whenever you're bringing these people in, you say that you want them to be more productive, be more collaborative, be more innovative, be more creative, and you think that them being in the office is going to do that. How does it make sense if the entire team does not live in one location to go to that one office, right? If you are asking people to come back into the office and they are still spread out, I got news for you. You're still working remotely. It doesn't make sense. And that's why employees are so frustrated with RTO, because they don't lead with why. I've said this on other times. Like, if the real issue is that Dell has 36 offices and they have big lease coming out each month or each year, and they're not utilizing the space, employees are going to react better to an employee or an employer saying, "Hey everyone, I hate to do this. I know the way of the market, the way of the future work is going flexible. But unfortunately, we weren't prepared for that. And so we have to make sacrifices. And unfortunately, that includes you having to make sacrifices. We're not saying that this is permanent, but for right now, we're asking you to come into the office at least 3 days a week if you live within an hour away from an office, an approved office." Again, we understand that this is not ideal, but our lease goes until 2030. So at least until 2030, we're going to have to do this. Now, for remote employees, you can stay working remotely, but unfortunately, and this is where I was going good for a second, but I can't even put this into play. Like, for remote employees, based off of our research, and I'm sure that they don't have any, based off of their research, if you want to be promoted, you do have to come into the office 3 days a week. See, like, if Dell would have taken this approach, there would have been an entirely different article being posted and being talked about right now. Instead of this backlash from Dell, from their own employees, as well as the observers, there would have been a headline saying Dell does RTO the right way and how other companies can follow suit. That would have been the article. And that's good PR. You might lose people, you probably will, but you don't lose trust. And what Dell is doing right now is losing trust from its veteran employees, people that have been working at the company for 10 years or longer. I hope that if you are thinking about a return to office policy, you take what I just said into consideration. Transparency is the key to building trust. And I think too many people think if you can't be transparent and positive, then you're going to get a negative outcome. That's not true. The research suggests that if you bring in your employees to the conversation, to the table, you allow them to speak up, you allow them to have a voice, you allow them to be a participant of the strategy. Even if you don't go with their suggestion, they are more likely to adapt in a positive outcome versus what we're seeing with so many return to office policies or mandates. Whew. Okay. There's one more bullet on this, and then we'll go to the next article. And it kind of ties into what we're talking about. So number 4, employee dissatisfaction and potential fallout. Dell employees express frustration and concern over the new policy, with some contemplating leaving the company, citing a perceived lack of autonomy and control over their jobs. This is a quote directly from the article again. This level of micromanagement makes me want to leave Dell. What's funny is we talked about mastery being a key function of engaged employees. The other two are purpose and autonomy. For those that don't know, autonomy means that you are giving the employee the ability to participate in the way that their work gets done in the best way for them, right? So you're not breathing down their throat saying, oh, you haven't made 10 calls today and it's 9 or 10 a.m. Or you haven't made 60 calls and it's at the end of the day. Or I haven't seen X, Y. You know, it's just this breathing down the neck. It's not good for anyone. Think about this is I feel like I say this in every Future of Work weekly report. If you're a leader, if you're an executive and you make company decisions that impact a lot of people, don't think about it from your standpoint. Think about it in terms of putting yourself in their shoes, right? If you are not willing to do this as a leader, why would any employee be willing to do this? The thing that I'll end with on this article is basically what they said in the article, and I might not remember this correctly, but basically what's going to happen is the employees are going to leave, and that's actually beneficial to Dell. Not for a great reason or an ethical reason, but it's great for Dell because if anybody leaves on their own volition, they do not have to pay the severance. And just imagine what that cost would be for somebody who's been at the company for 10, 12, 15, 20 years. That's going to be a pretty hefty price, right? And so a lot of people are taking this RTO mandate from Dell in a way to abdicate their responsibility. I'm sure that with this, they're imagining that maybe 10%, 15% are going to leave on their own volition. And that's going to help their overhead cost, but I can tell you that it's not going to help their productivity. Because even though it's not a specific reduction in force or RIF or a straight up layoff, it is going to be detrimental to the company because they just lost trust with a majority of their employees. And that is tough to get back. And what's going to happen is those experienced customers are going to go to a company who focuses on the future of work and really cares about their employees. Okay. So that's article number 1, all about Dell, return to work or return to office policy. It's not good. Okay. Now we're going to go into article number 2. Article number 2 is coming from HR Drive. This was published on March 19th, 2024. And the article title is 3 in 4 workers say they haven't been trained for flexible work arrangements. So let's talk about this. The first bullet point is lack of training and flexible work arrangements. Despite the widespread adoption of hybrid work, a majority of employers have not provided adequate training to support flexible work arrangements, leaving 3 out of 4 workers feeling unprepared. And then some of the statistics here, and then we'll talk about a direct quote. So only 42% of workers report receiving training to handle flexible work, highlighting a significant gap in employer support. One of the other things, and I know I said 3, but from a manager-employee relationship standpoint, the way that you get the most out of your employee is to provide managerial support and managerial attention. This is why reward recognition is important. This is why calling out how your employee is doing a great job and tying that to a core value is important. And just being there to set the direction of what the employee needs to know, set the direction and expectation. Once they understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish in their position, in their role, now you can give them the autonomy to do what they need to do to reach the outcome, right? That's how you don't micromanage. You create a strategy as a leader, and that should be connected to your overall company strategy. And then you connect that strategy to that individual employee's or teammates or team goal, right? Now they have the direction, they have the North Star. And it doesn't matter how they get it done. It just matters that they get it done, right? So think about that. So 42% of workers report not receiving training. Only 42% of workers report receiving training. That means that the other portion of that haven't. So it's over 50%. That's important. Because if you don't have that alignment, and if you don't have that, like I said, North Star direction, then people are going to be thinking that they're working towards whatever goal that it is. But in reality, one person's going to be going over here, the other's going to go over here, one's moving backwards, one's moving forward, and none of them work together, right? So that is a big importance. That's where Grapevine comes in, because we help keep teams aligned on everything. Important updates, boom, add it to Grapevine. An important project, boom, add it to Grapevine, right? Okay, so this quote is under the same bullet point. So the pandemic forced the majority of organizations into hybrid work practically overnight, with no time to consider how to support new practices. This is coming from Wendy Hamilton, CEO of TechSmith, stated. Now, what I like about this is that at Grapevine, we're building a coalition of people who specifically focus on providing support to remote and hybrid workforces. So you have people like Tammy Bielen with Workplaceless. Then you have Allie Green with Remote Works, and then her own personal consultancy or advisory. Simon Holmes helps, especially on the technical side. How do you get your technical team to work better remotely, right? So we're building a coalition, and whenever you take on Grapevine, you can get access to these people, right? We got to work out the details, but we can refer you out to those people to help you, right? Because we know that our software is going to take on a lot. But at the same time, you have to coach your people. You have to train your people on how to work remotely, on how to work in a flexible environment. If you don't, then there's going to be a lot of miscommunication, misalignment. There's deadlines are going to get missed. People are not going to know what to do. They're not going to feel excited to come to work. They don't even know why they come to work at that point. And whenever that happens, they become dissatisfied. They become disengaged, actively disengaged sometimes, and then they leave. So your retention goes down, your attrition goes up. All these things are bad for productivity. All these things are bad for the bottom line. So take that into consideration. The next bullet point is shift in work dynamics. Over the past 5 years, the option to work remotely has become increasingly prevalent, with 58% of workers now having the opportunity to work remotely at least some of the time, necessitating new skills for leaders and managers. I like this because honestly, we've needed these skills for managers to take on in general, but being remote, as I always say, it makes it more difficult to just get by. Right? You have to have structure in flexibility. You have to have structure in remote. And I know that sounds contradicting, but for you to be able to give your team autonomy, as I mentioned, you have to have the strategy in place. What I didn't mention is you also want to have your processes and systems aligned to remote work, aligned to how you work flexibly. If you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult to allow employees to grow, right? And so I don't think, like, if we go back to the Dell article for a second, I don't think that Dell is actually asking people to come into the office for productivity, because the real underlying root cause of people not being productive is that they don't have the right support. They don't have the right structure. They don't have the right guidance. They don't have the right systems, processes, tools to make it happen, right? And there's so many, I won't go into detail on that. Maybe in a different episode, we can dive into that. But those are table stakes. And in an in-office approach, you can get by because you can manage by walking by or walkthroughs or observation. But just looking at people doesn't mean that they're productive. In fact, that probably reduces their production. Anyway, bullet point number 3, position and generational disparities. Access to flexibility varies depending on position and generation, with managers more tied to office locations than individual contributors, and baby boomers enjoying more flexibility compared to Generation Z. This is an observation from the article. Managers may overestimate their effectiveness in relating to remote workers, potentially impacting retention and company culture. This is exactly what we're talking about. If you don't have the right guidelines, policies, boundaries clearly identified, and a structure around how you're going to approach working as somebody in the office, managing a remote worker, or vice versa, then you are going to see what they're talking about here, which is the impacts of retention and company culture. But this is a key thing that you have to think about, right? We call it proximity bias. If a manager is in the office and then they have some of the team in the office, they're going to cater to the people in the office, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. If you take the time to create a strategy on how you work, then it doesn't matter if that person is in the office, hybrid, or 100% remote, because you have these, what I call operational cadences in place. For example, you have a 101 every single week. You might have a growth plan that you discuss every single week or every single month. and you track how that person is tracking towards that growth plan. And then you coach them if there's any elements of surprise or challenge or bottlenecks, right? So we just got to get better at how we work. That's the key thing. It doesn't matter if it's in office or remote. We got to get better at how we work. And that all comes down to operations. Now, the quote that they talk here is, managers think they're better at their jobs than they actually are, according to checker.com report. We kind of touched on that. But that means that managers need to be a little bit more self-aware. They need to educate themselves, or they need to invest in someone to help educate themselves. Because sometimes you can't see what you don't know, and what you don't know is hard to correct because you don't know, right? So that's important. All right, I'm going to go through this one quickly so we can get to the last article. Challenges in managing remote workers. Managers may struggle to effectively manage remote workers, particularly in recognizing and supporting their contributions, highlighting the need for additional training and management strategies. Observation: remote HR functions pose challenges for recruiting, hiring, and onboarding, leading to increased turnover rates and employee burnout. And then I'll just say the quote, and then we can tie it all together. In a hybrid work environment, managers may face challenges in intentionally recognizing their remote workers, according to, I can't say that word, Perceptics, with a Y and X, report. So I'll just say this quickly. It all comes back to structure. I won't repeat myself too much on this one, but whenever it comes to onboarding, there are statistics out there that if you have a better onboarding approach and you make your employees feel like they belong at the early stage of their tenure at your company, they are more likely to stay at your company, I want to say 3 to 4 years. That is huge. And I think tons of companies are doing a terrible job at onboarding in a remote environment. But here's the thing. You have an option too. If you do have an office, or rent out a co-working space, or use something like Radius for like Airbnb for your home office, like, bring these people in. If you don't know how to train remotely or onboard remotely or continuously enable your team remotely, then go back to the old ways and bring them in for a full week or 2 weeks even, if you're able to do that. And get them to connect personally in person, if that's your thing. And then guide them on what needs to happen. And then afterwards, make sure that you continue that relationship and provide them with the key details that they need to be successful. And again, go back to the expectations. What are you expecting of your employees whenever it comes to onboarding, training? What do they need to know? When do they need to be ramped up by? And how are you tracking that? Don't just keep it in here. Share it with them. Be transparent. Again, it goes back to trust. And that's what you're doing in the beginning. Whenever it comes to onboarding and training, you are building trust with your employee. You told them something in the interview, and if you don't follow through with that in the actual setting of the work environment, then you are already losing. You're already losing the employee. And then add on top of that bad onboarding and training, they're going to be gone sooner than you think. Okay, so this article is coming from MIT Sloan, and the title is Return to Office Mandates, How to Lose Your Best Performers. It was published March 20th, 2024. So the first bullet point is negative impact on return to office mandates. What they're saying is recent RTO or return to office mandates exemplified by companies like UPS and Boeing emphasize a 5-day office return, driven by concerns about productivity. However, evidence suggests that such mandates undermine employee engagement and increase attrition, particularly among high-performing employees and those with caregiving responsibilities. They say among executives who implemented RTO mandates, only 1 in 3 believes it's positively impacted productivity. indicating internal dissatisfaction with the approach. And then a direct quote from the article: this is mounting evidence that mandates don't improve financial performance. Instead, they damage employee engagement and increase attrition, as highlighted in a study by University of Pittsburgh researchers. I think that this is something that Dell is about to experience, right? They are forcing an RTO policy. Now, it's not 5 days in the office each week, but it is something that is contradicting what they promise to their employees, right? We'll see how this plays out for UPS and Boeing. It's still a little bit early. And, I mean, there's other variables now, too, because Boeing's CEO just mentioned that he was going to step down yesterday, actually. But the key thing to call out here is that these mandates undermine employee engagement and increase attrition. What are some of the key metrics that you track to make sure that your company is productive? Employee engagement and attrition or retention, right? Because that's telling us, okay, one, if we have better retention, we're not going to have as much overhead whenever it comes to hiring, firing, training, all these kind of stuffs. And then whenever you have employee engagement, and an engaged employee is a better worker, they're more productive, they're better for the morale of the company. So that's like a cascading effect, so to speak, or a ripple in the pond, where if you have an employee that is engaged, they're most likely going to get other people engaged through their excitement of being there, right? Especially if that person is a leader, because then that trickles down to their entire team. And so, but this is important because we see so many companies saying, okay, we're going to do return to office because we need to be more productive. Again, go back in this video and go to the part where I'm saying what Dell should have done to have a better outcome versus what they're about to experience, in my opinion, and probably what they're already experiencing. So that's important to know. You have to think about the consequences. You have to think about the offset consequences. If we do this, what are the potential outcomes? Let's be prepared for them. And if you do that and you're okay with that, that's fine. Just make sure that it aligns to your purpose of your company, your vision, your mission, and your core values. Because if not, then you are going to lose the trust of your employees. And then shortly after that, you're going to lose your employees to someone who believes in the future of work. Again, this is for mainly knowledge workers, but even in certain circumstances, you can be a little bit more flexible in your rigid approach to work. Even if it's like a factory worker. I worked in a factory for 2.5 years. Before that, I worked with my dad in construction and renovation. So I'm not just one of these people who are coming in from an academic standpoint or a knowledge worker standpoint. I've been in that position, right? And I know that it's a little bit difficult to have flexibility in some of those. But as I mentioned in another weekly report, this is an opportunity. If you have knowledge working positions, give your employees a way to grow into that, right? I was a roofer. If I could have grown into an office worker through certain steps, I would have definitely done that, right? I'm glad that they didn't offer that because I went back to school, finished my degree, got my MBA, and learned about organizational psychology, and then eventually started Grapevine. So it worked out for me, but as a company, you have these options, right? If you want to be more productive, give your team autonomy, give them a way to grow, and then continue to do things that keep them engaged, like rewards and recognition. Shout them out. Connect their behaviors to core values so the rest of the team sees what's important to you, what's important to the company. There's so many different things that you can do, but you have to be intentional. So, all right, we got a couple more bullet points, so let me stop preaching. Okay, focus on productivity over physical presence. Monitoring employees' physical presence in the office as a proxy for productivity is outdated and ineffective. Instead, organizations should prioritize outcomes-driven approaches that emphasize trust and flexibility in where and when work is accomplished, leading to improved engagement and performance. This is the observation from the article. Monitoring activities such as office attendance leads to lower performance and increased anxiety among employees, distracting or detracting from organizational goals. A specific quote from the article was saying, focusing instead on their outcomes and giving them workplace flexibility can inspire a boom loop, B-O-O-M, loop in engagement, as proposed by the Institute for Corporate Productivity Research. Basically what this bullet point is saying, if you monitor your employees, you're going against their trust. You're saying, hey, if we don't track this, then I don't believe that you're doing work. Instead of seeing the outcomes, right? That's the thing that I love about remote work the most, is that it is all about focusing on the outcomes, right? What did they say? Outcome-driven approaches. And that goes back to setting the strategy, having a specific goal for your team, and then having individual goals like KPIs or OKRs to focus on how that employee is going to contribute to that strategy, right? If they understand the North Star, then they can figure their own way out on how to achieve that and produce that outcome. And you as a leader you should be there to guide and coach them or help them overcome challenges, right? If you don't think like that, it's going to be hard for you to be a remote leader. And then let's just see. The other part of this is that they say if you monitor your employees, then like office attendance, that actually leads to lower performance and increased anxiety among employees. And so when you are a lower performer and then you have anxiety, what they're saying here is that is going to reduce your potential of achieving organizational goals. The exact opposite of what you're trying to accomplish, right? So you have to take this stuff into consideration whenever thinking about how you're going to operate. If you say that you're going to be 100% remote, then you have to have a few qualities. Transparency. So keep your employees aligned. Keep them updated. There's a statistic out there, I think it said companies who are more transparent with their company news have a 86% increase in engagement from employees. And that's specifically what we do at Grapevine. We provide you a company social intranet, a community to keep everything in one central location for a source of truth whenever it comes to updates, announcements, company events, and then just shouting out or keeping employees connected through our community. So, okay, hopefully that made sense. I'm kind of, I need to take a sip of my coffee. Here we go. So we're going to go to the third bullet point of this last article. Okay, impact on employee satisfaction and retention. Mandating a return to the office, especially for employees who have demonstrated effectiveness while remote, negatively impacts job satisfaction and increases the likelihood of attrition, particularly among high-performing individuals, caregivers, and historically underrepresented groups. It's very similar to the first one, it sounds like. 75% of employees unhappy with their level of flexibility express intentions to seek new employment, indicating a strong correlation between flexibility and retention. That's important, right? Because this is called a lagging indicator. So whenever you do your RTO, you might be thinking that you're fine 6 months down the road, but actually that employee is in the background looking for another position that allows them the flexibility that matches what they're looking for as an employee, right? and they know that there are jobs out there. So they're willing to stick with it to keep that paycheck while underperforming, and then blindside you by leaving. Blindside you, right? This is that consequence, right? If you do an RTO mandate, just understand that these things are going to happen. You're going to see lower productivity, you're going to see lower engagement, and you're going to see higher attrition. Those are the opposite things that you want as a business owner, right? Okay. Let's go to the fourth one, and we'll wrap this up. So, building a boom loop of engagement. I should have mentioned this earlier, but in the article, and I definitely think that you should read this article. It's from Brian Elliott, and he talks about the doom loop, which is what we were talking about. So companies have anxiety, they have higher attrition, lower productivity, lower performance, lower morale, or lower engagement. That's the doom loop. This is the boom loop. This is what Brian is saying is the future of how we should work. So organizations that prioritize trust, flexibility, and outcome-driven approaches outperform their peers financially. By aligning on key outcomes, providing flexibility, and fostering trust, companies can create a positive cycle of engagement and performance known as the boom loop. So this is the observation from this. Clarity around organizational objectives and performance metrics, coupled with flexibility at the individual and team levels, foster a culture of trust and accountability, leading to improved engagement and performance. And then a quote directly from the article. When trust is balanced with accountability, people and organizations will thrive, emphasizing the importance of creating an environment that values outcome over micromanagement. Again, just to prove a point, put yourself in this position. Have you ever been micromanaged where it encourages you to be more productive? Or it encourages you to be more engaged in your organization? Speaking from my own experience, it does the exact opposite. Whenever I experienced a micromanager, and even worse than a micromanager, a bully boss, I started to disengage and I started to look for another position as soon as possible. Right? I even took it to HR, and we weren't able to do anything quick enough to have anything change. Even though they were on my side, during this approach, even if the outcome would have been a little bit better, I would have left, because that's not the type of organization that I want to work for. I want an organization that he talks about here: trust, flexibility, outcome-driven approach. That's why our mission at Grapevine is to make work more flexible, inclusive, and fulfilling for everyone. Because if we feel like we can do those three things, then we can help you and your company have a more trusted organization, a more outcome-driven approach, and then a more flexible environment, which allows for better engagement and productivity. So it's all conducive of itself. But these, you got to read this article to get the nitty-gritty. But this boom loop is good to adapt to remote or hybrid or flexible work. Right? Those are the three. I told you it was a jam-packed schedule today. So just to recap, we had the return to office mandates, how to lose your best performers, from MIT Sloan, March 20th, 2024. We talked about 3 in 4 workers say that they haven't been trained for flexible work arrangements. That was from HR Drive, March 19th, 2024. And then the first one was Dell workers can stay remote, but they're not going to get promoted, from Business Insider on March 16th, 2024. I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments. What is your perception of the future of work? Good or bad, right? We'll take all the comments that we can. I want to get a more, a better perspective from the people out there. I have my own experience, my own thoughts. These articles have their own narrative, their own specific materials that they're trying to put out there. So drop it in the comment. What is your take on these specific articles from this week? And let's have a conversation around it. And if you have a good comment, we'll bring it up in the next video. But as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers. We're at 399 right now. That fluctuates from time to time. But if you are a future of work pioneer and you want to continue to stay updated on Grapevine's progress, as well as the future of work, current events, and trends, then this is the channel for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.